All right, class, it's a new week. Welcome to June 13th through the 18th, Survey and Correlational Research. So survey research, of course, is research that heavily relies upon surveys or questionnaires that are sent out to people, and then the people respond and send back in the information. And correlational research is that type of research that tries to determine the relationship between two variables and to determine whether that relationship is positive. If there's more of one thing, then there will be more of the other. Or if the relationship maybe is negative, where there's less of one thing, there might be more of another. So those are two different types of research. And these types of research are not the types that can help you determine causality, meaning they can't help you to know whether A causes B, but they can help you to see relationships and trends and those kinds of things. So they're still very, very useful, even though they might not show you causality. So anyway, on here we have prepare for research activity. You won't see that on yours because it's just set as a draft. I'm not going to have you prepare for the research activity yet. So I'm still determining whether that's something I want to do or not. And so that's not something you need to do, but you will need to be reading chapters 7 and 8 in the textbook on survey research and correlational research and review the slides that are listed here. And then you'll take quizzes on those chapters as well. Also, during this week, you'll have a discussion about APA in-text citations and references. So this week's discussion is a chance to practice your skills with APA formatting. So you're going to find a research article to cite, and then you're going to include a short excerpt from the actual article, and then include an original sentence that you might write that paraphrases the excerpt from the article with proper APA in-text citation. And then you'll include a quotation and use proper in-text citation for a quotation, and then finally include a reference to the article that is APA formatted. So that reference would go down at the bottom of your preliminary literature review or your papers that you write. So that's the discussion. Remember to respond by Wednesday and then respond to other students by Friday or Saturday. Finally, of course, you have your preliminary literature review due by the end of this week. So by June 18th at midnight, you need to have that completed. And you're going to use that annotated reference list that you have been creating as you have read research reports to make a preliminary literature review. It should include APA formatted narrative writing. Studies should be categorized logically according to results or types of studies or focus of studies or another logical factor. So in this literature review, don't just list one study, tell me what it says, list another study, tell me what it said, list another study, tell me what it said. Don't do that. Instead, organize the studies and put them into different sections of your paper. So one section might be studies that found this, and you might list a bunch of different studies and say, well, Smith and so forth found this about this concept. And that's very similar to the findings of Johnson, where he did this study and found this as well. So you can't just list, one study, tell me what it says, and then another study, tell me what it says. That's an annotated bibliography, and I don't want that. I want you to take it another step further and get deeper into the research and kind of compare and contrast the studies that you have found to make sure that they, and to tell what they're really saying. And the writing has to flow logically and systematically, and there must be 7 to 10 sources in your references. And also it's going to be obviously APA formatted writing. So yeah, I think the best thing I can do at this point is to give you a few examples and show you a few that might help you. For this assignment, I will give you feedback on your work, and you'll be creating a bigger literature review later, at least 15 cited sources. And so you're going to have to continue after you submit this to read more research and to fit the pieces of that research in. So how I'll be grading this is that I want to see that methods and results and findings from each reference study should be adequately presented. Now you don't have to present and tell everything about a study. Most studies you'd only want to have a few, maybe a paragraph or two or a sentence or two about that study to make sure that you have all the results and findings adequately presented. Make sure it flows well with transitional and organizing sentences and paragraphs. It should be organized, the reference studies should be organized logically according to their results or the types of studies or focus of studies or another logical factor. So organize it that way. Don't organize it just by saying first study I read was this one, the next study I read was this one. Proper APA formatting is used for all in-text citations. The document is APA formatted and there are 7 to 10 sources, and proper APA formatting is used for all items in the reference list. So I am looking for the APA formatting, and this is your first chance to kind of get into that as well, and you'll have some time to practice on the discussion board this week for that. So that's the idea with this literature review. And I want to look at a couple of examples, literature reviews that I have, and I'll provide these to you as well so that you can see them here. Maybe I'll just add them right in right here. So if you look under today's Survey and Correlational Research Week, down at the bottom you'll see a couple of example preliminary literature reviews that I have included from past students. And these are good examples. Both of them scored fairly well for their literature review scores for their preliminary literature review. And I just want to show you some of the points of this literature review. So this one has a nice introductory paragraph that talks about teacher mentoring, and it doesn't include any sources there because this person is making kind of a summary or kind of an idea or introducing the topic. And then it discusses things like teachers face many challenges that make the first years of teaching difficult. Kumi, Yubo, and James agree, stating novice teachers often face challenges such as classroom management, etc. So they're telling what's in the literature. And one thing you'll notice in these examples too is that they're not referring to themselves. Like this student's not saying, I found 10 sources and I really like these ones. No, it's not about yourself, so don't refer to yourself in the literature review. Instead, just tell me what the literature says, For instance, this is organized nice and logically too, like teachers facing challenges we have there. Isolation is another factor that negatively affects new teachers. And so there are sources of research studies that have been done that show that isolation is a factor that negatively affects new teachers, including Paris, Ormond, and this one as well, looks like. So due to the pressures explained above, new teachers may decide to leave the education field, and it talks about the attrition rate. And there are different studies, not just one study that talks about the attrition rate, but a couple of them. First year of teaching can seem like a long year. Let's see. If teachers keep pressures to themselves, they have no one to seek counsel from, they may easily become discouraged. So this is a bold statement, but again, it's backed up later with research and statistics. There's a reference right here to teachers with a mentor seek help significantly more than new teachers without a mentor. New teachers need support, and so forth. And it just really does a good job of kind of substantiating the claims that it makes through those different topics. And then it goes through, and what it does is actually it starts more general, like any good literature review. It starts more general, like teacher mentoring. Teachers face problems, and the solution might be mentoring. And then it goes more specific into the type of study that the person wants to eventually submit or propose. So later on, it says something like, let's see if we can get here. It talks about mentoring programs more specifically and what programs have had good effects. And so it very easily leads into now the person has planned on making a proposal to do some kind of a study about teacher mentoring. And actually the proposal was to take teachers who hadn't had a mentor and compare them with teachers who did have a mentor and see what their attrition rate was or their dropout rate from teaching, and other factors, their satisfaction with teaching and so forth, which makes a lot of sense. And so, of course, this is in the education area, and I realize not all of you are in that area, but you can see a lot of good elements of a literature review in this paper because it leads the person toward a study. And that's what you'll want to do with your lit review. you want to lead toward a study. In this class, you're going to propose a research study. You don't actually have to complete the research study that you propose, but you are going to propose a study that you could do and that might be interesting to you. And your literature review must relate to that. It must lead into that because that's going to be a part of the final thing that you submit. And nobody can really propose or do a study without doing a good literature review. You have to do the work. You have to do the legwork to find out what research has already been done and what information is maybe still missing. Then you can find a good place or a gap in the literature, that's where the information is missing, so that you can do a research study to fill in that gap. And so that's one example. There's also another example here on reading, independent reading in the high school classroom. And again, this is a good example of a preliminary literature review, so you can take a look at that as well as you look at some of these examples. But again, it's going to lead to your study proposal. So you start out more general on your literature review, you get more specific toward studies that really relate to what you might want to study and what you might want to propose in this class, in your research proposal in this class. So that literature review is a preliminary literature review is due this week. If you have questions, feel free to email me. But just looking forward a little bit to next week, there is a proposal description due next week. So look at that assignment as well. You're going to have to complete a task from the textbook. It's in, well, it gives you a page there, but it may be different depending on what textbook you have, but I think it's in page 114. And it would include an introduction, a statement of a problem that you want to research, review of the literature, and that's just to put your finished preliminary review of literature here, and then a statement of hypothesis. So by the time you submit this, you have to have a good idea of what kind of research proposal you might propose for this class. You know, what research study might you propose to do? Now, again, I mentioned you don't have to actually do this research study, but you do need to make a good proposal for a research study that you could conduct if you had to. So be aware of that, and that will be coming up next week. So be thinking about that as you go through your literature review and how that literature review can lead into a good research study. And I think most of you have really good topics as we've talked about them on the discussion board to complete this. Finally, for this week, I just want you to consider this idea of correlation versus causation. Take a look at some of these graphs. This is U.S. spending on science, space, and technology, correlated with suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. And if you look at the graph, you notice that they're very highly correlated. These are very highly correlated things. Let's see, number of people who drowned by falling into a pool and films Nicolas Cage appeared in. So the black is the films Nicolas Cage appeared in, and then the red is the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool. So based on these findings, you might think, well, if Nicolas Cage appears in more films, then more people are going to be drowned by falling into a pool. But that's the difference between correlation and causation, right? You can't infer that because the one doesn't necessarily cause the other, even though they are highly correlated with each other. Another example here is per capita cheese consumption and number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. So you could look at this and say, well, it looks like if more people eat cheese, then more people are going to who die by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. And the per capita consumption of margarine versus divorce rate in Maine. So it seems like the more people eat margarine, the more they're going to be divorcing, or the less, then the less. But the truth is that that correlation does not mean causation. It just means that different items correlate well. So you can make some inferences. You can make some predictions with the data. You might say, well, as more people are eating margarine, maybe there will be more divorces in Maine. But you can't really say that eating margarine leads to divorce or that number of people drowning into a pool is caused by Nicolas Cage films. So that's just a preliminary item on correlation versus causation. Well, good luck to you and have a great week.